Let's continue with the cluster B dramatic, emotional, and erratic disorders. In this video, we're going to discuss histrionic and narcissistic. The histrionic personality is characterized by excessive levels of emotion and a lot of elaborate attention seeking. Their core belief is people are there to serve or admire me. This is a story about Melissa. Melissa was facing her third divorce. Her marriages, as well as her dating relationships, were always of short duration. She was hungry for excitement, and being intimately involved with the same person became boring after a while, especially as Melissa had no real passion that gave her life meaning and that she could share with another person. Her verbal interchanges with others were lively, but superficial and somewhat ambiguous, punctuated by smiles and expressive gestures. Although she often acted seductively and wanted the man's sexual desire, she wasn't that interested in the physical part of sex. Always being attractive took work as well as some money. She didn't want all that to be disarranged by the groping hands of a man. Men usually misinterpreted her flirtatious and seductive behavior, only to become disappointed after dating her for a while or being married to her. And Melissa could not allow them to stray and find with another woman what they had originally wanted from her, not while they were associated with her. Melissa's life had become the perfect recipe for relationship breakups. The periods between relationships became longer and more frequent over time, and the depression that often filled those periods became stronger with every breakup. There had been a few suicide threats and even attempts over the years. Would this latest divorce be the trigger for another suicide attempt? This is a person who is extremely uncomfortable if they are not the center of attention. Their interaction with others is inappropriately sexually seductive or provocative. So they might enter the room at a cocktail party with work dressed inappropriately, a little too low cut, a little too tight, and be very kind of strutting around the room, knowing that they're being looked at, batting the eyes, tilting the chin down and the eyes up, touching a man a little too familiarly for that particular situation. They have rapidly shifting and shallow emotions. They want to get the attention. They don't want to actually have the emotional connection. They're seductive and they want the sexual attention, but then they don't actually want to have sex. They use their physical appearance to draw attention to the self. So this is a woman or a man who will strut around the pool, showing off. Their speech is excessively impressionistic and lacking in detail. So they'll talk about, a relationship that they're having and say that it's the best thing in the world and it was so wonderful and he was so handsome and loved her so much, but details are few and far between. It almost sounds not even real. They're very dramatic, very theatrical, and very exaggerated in their emotional expression. They're suggestible. You can suggest to them things and they'll just believe it. And then they often will consider relationships to be more intimate than they are. About 2/3 of people with histrionic disorder also have antisocial personality disorder. So that's very interesting. It's possible that histrionic is a sex type alternative to antisocial, that maybe this is the female variant of psychopathy. In treatment, you have to recognize what the disorder really is, that this is histrionic behavior. Otherwise, the empathy and appreciation and understanding that a therapist naturally gives to their client can actually reinforce the disorder. Confronting that psychological need to be the center of attention often causes the patient to terminate therapy. The goal of therapy here would be to treat relationship difficulties and show the patient that short-term gain ends up in long-term loss. So all the gallivanting around in front of people and getting this sort of sexual attention is not actually conducive to a long-term relationship, which would make them happier in the long run. A classic example of histrionic personality disorder from TV, I think, is Kelly Kapoor. She has to be the center of attention. She's inappropriately seductive all the time. She uses her appearance to get attention. Her speech is real impressionistic. She speaks in these sort of vague generalities. She's dramatic and theatrical. She's very suggestible, seems quite naive all the time. And of course, she considers her relationship with Ryan Howard to be more intimate than it really is. She's convinced they're going to be married. And of course, he's convinced that she is just a casual date, which is not very much unlike how teenagers often see their first sexual experience. Teenage girls often think it's love, and teenage boys often think it's casual. All right, let us discuss narcissistic personality disorder. Cluster B, the last one here, dramatic, emotional, and erratic. The defining characteristics are grandiosity, need for admiration, and no empathy. Their core belief is, since I'm special, I deserve special rules. I think a lot of you probably think that you know a narcissist. If you search narcissism or narcissist on the internet, boy, you get a lot. I have an acquaintance right now who's constantly posting TikToks on social media about how to overcome narcissistic abuse. Be aware that a lot of people can be narcissistic. That doesn't necessarily mean that they have narcissistic personality disorder, which, let's see, I've got the book right here. The prevalence of it is 0.1 to 0.8% of the population, so not even 1%. Can people be narcissistic? Do you know people who are behaving in narcissistic ways? Of course you do. Here's the thing about narcissism, guys. We were born narcissists. We were born completely self-centered, as we needed to be, because we were so utterly helpless. We're born narcissistic and dependent. And then when we don't mature out of that, then we grow up to be adults with narcissistic personality disorder. Blake was an overly pampered child who could do no wrong. When caught with pot, his father sued the district and then transferred him to a prep school because Blake was such a genius, he needed to be someplace better. His grades were bad, but he had money to buy papers to submit. Don't do that. His SAT scores were low, but his father bought him admission to an elite college. Notice one of the themes here is that he has to be in special places. He has to be in elite places all the time. He dated casually until he got the sex he wanted, and then he dumped him. Enamored of the sweet working class homecoming queen who refused to date him due to his horrible reputation, he finally convinced her to go on a date. He acted the gentleman, didn't even kiss her goodnight, certainly didn't try to approach her sexually, and then he paid off a florist to send her 4 dozen red roses in the middle of the night as a grand gesture to try to win her over. It worked, and they dated, but she wanted to go to med school after undergrad, and he wanted a barefoot pregnant wife. When she refused, he slipped Rohypnol in her champagne and had unprotected sex with her. He raped her under the influence of Rohypnol, and she became pregnant, and she gave up med school. He cheated on her continually. He took a place in his father's company and fired anyone who displeased him. As soon as he took over the company, he fired the secretary that had been there for 40 years and hired a hot young thing who he immediately started having a relationship with. Set his wife up in the country where he didn't have to interact with her very much. And one day the secretary showed up on the doorstep of his country house where his wife was. Wife subsequently kicked him out. At this point, he's 40 and depressed and might seek help. The clinical description: grandiose self-importance, exaggerates achievement and talents, expects recognition without achievement. So we see that with Blake. He expects to get good grades without working for it, expects to go to the best college without achieving enough to get in. Preoccupied with fantasies of success, power, brilliance, beauty, and ideal love. We see this in 2 ways with Blake. Number 1, he has to be hugely successful in school and business. And number 2, he idealizes the homecoming queen. She represents the unattainable, the ideal woman, the ideal pure beauty, and he must have her. He believes that he's special and unique and can only be understood by or associate with other special high-status people or institutions. So for Blake, anybody less than the beautiful homecoming queen was probably not good enough. Anything less than an elite college is not good enough for him. He wants excessive admiration. He has a sense of entitlement, interpersonally exploitative, takes advantage of others to achieve own needs. So his goal was wife, stay at home, barefoot and pregnant. Girlfriend says, no, I don't want that. And so he exploits her, drugs her with Rohypnol, and takes advantage in order to achieve his own desires. Has no empathy, felt nothing for her as she lay there helpless, felt nothing for the secretary who was taken advantage of. He's envious and believes others are envious of him, arrogant and haughty. Only 1%, less than 1%. Of the people who fit the narcissist description, 50 to 75% are male. What are the causes of this? Certainly there's some inherited traits, some behavioral modeling, and some parenting. We are born as infants completely self-centered and demanding because we're totally helpless, and it's a matter of life and death. If you're laying there helpless as a one-day-old newborn, you'll die within a couple of days at most. So if you're not fed, so you are ultimately self-centered and demanding, and that's adaptive for you. But it's parents' job. It's the parents' job to help us, to socialize us so that we are not completely self-centered and not completely demanding and dependent. So there seems to be a profound failure of parents to model empathy and to encourage the child to be less self-centered. So notice that with the Blake story, I keep thinking Bruce, with the Blake story, the parents constantly bail him out. The dad explodes at the school and says he wasn't smoking pot. No way my son would do that. His dad enables him to be self-centered and to be demanding and to be grandiose. Treatment focuses on helping the person not to be so hypersensitive to evaluation, so that they're not constantly seeking, all of this attention and self-aggrandizement. Part of the focus is teaching the person to empathize, replacing fantasies with actual achievable goals. So instead of a fantasy about having the perfect homecoming queen who is a paragon of virtue and purity, what's a realistic option? Instead of I must go to an Ivy League school, what's a realistic option that will make you happy and be a rewarding life? Also focuses on teaching coping strategies and managing depression, which does tend to take hold in narcissists eventually. Treatment is often initiated for depression in middle age when everything is crumbling around them. I would say Ryan Howard is the classic example of narcissistic personality disorder. He is grandiose. He's preoccupied with power and success. He believes he's special. He requires admiration. He's completely entitled. He's exploitative with Kelly. He exploits her all the time, and he is extremely arrogant. I'm pretty sure that the people who wrote The Office just pulled the DSM out and started creating characters. Okay, we will see you in the next video when we talk about the cluster C disorders.